Stars, whole galaxies of the northern hemisphere grace America's brow. Rainbows and corals of the sea. But from her trove of natural wonders come three jewels to stud her crown. Yellowstone in sprays of sparkling geysers. Yosemite in the golden light of a Sierra dawn. Grand Canyon, glowing with ever-changing colors. With over 350 sites covering some 80 million acres of the national park system of the United States, sites that range from an island paradise to an Arctic frontier. These three, Yellowstone, Yosemite, and the Grand Canyon, are the jewels in America's crown. Anywhere else in the world, this would be considered a mountain. Here, it's only a small peak in the canyon. The history of the Grand Canyon extends far back through inconceivable spans of time. It has brooded in northern Arizona for 10 million years. Its modern history began with discovery by the Spaniard Coronado in 1540. His lieutenant, Cardenas, came to the canyon and looked down on it without realizing its immensity. He thought the river was about 6 feet wide. In fact, it averages about 300. The first European man to explore the length of the canyon was Major John Wesley Powell. In May of 1869, his small party of 10 men left Green River, Wyoming, to begin this epic journey into the great unknown, as Powell called it. The boats were often swamped, and the men thrown overboard as they ran the rapids. After 13 weeks, Powell emerged from the canyon, eventually propelled to national prominence by his feat of exploration. He was able to fill in what had been a huge blank space in U.S. maps at that time. Now, the northwest corner of Arizona was better understood. Grand Canyon National Park clings to the course of the Colorado River as it slices through this corner of what is now Arizona. The nearest city is Flagstaff. It's probably the greatest natural wonder in North America. Even the statistics are staggering. A winding trip through the canyon by water is 277 miles. Today, these river runners don't face the same unknowns that Major Powell did when he made the first run in 1869. But they still face the excitement and the thrill, and the hint of danger is still there. Even though the river is no longer an unknown, as it was in Major Powell's time, it's still a thrill. The danger is still real. Each passenger feels for a time that he has reclaimed the spirit of Major Powell, the spirit of adventure. For thousands of years, other human eyes have looked on these scenes, surveyed these vistas, but from a different point of view. European man looked at this as a landscape to be conquered. The American Aborigine sought to become part of it, to become one with it. In these wind-scarred spaces, solitude is the nurturing element. For some visitors, the reason for coming to this place. In these spaces, a man may gain some perspective of his real significance in the universe. To experience something larger and greater than himself. Something much larger. These same trails have been used for 1,000 years. The Anasazi, the ancient ones, lived in and around the Grand Canyon long before the Spanish conquistadors came here in search of gold. There are over 2,000 sites where they left the remains of their buildings or petroglyphs, the figures they carved on rock. They planted crops along the Colorado River, raising corn, squash, and beans. The pottery shards are plentiful. One recent discovery is also a very significant find. It is called Shaman's Gallery. The ancients came to this spot to practice obscure rituals. At times, a mood of mysterious antiquity seems to linger here yet. In pre-dawn light, wranglers saddle mules. 65 mules going down this morning. It takes the wranglers 45 minutes to saddle up. The mules move sedately, but steadily, plunging down into the canyon, dropping 3,000 feet in a couple of hours. These mule rides are an accepted, even expected part of the Grand Canyon now. A nearby raven prowls the canyon edge, searching for breakfast. Warm air rises from the canyon, collides with moist air flowing in from the Pacific. The moisture coalesces into vapor and becomes visible as clouds. The rains come in July and August. The monsoon season has arrived, as it's known here. The storms pile up, almost one on top of the other, as if they were crashing together in great aerial collisions. This Grand Canyon is not timeless. There is only one constant here. That constant is change itself. The 10 million year process that formed this canyon is still an active, working force. Mule deer have cleaned the velvet from fully developed antlers now. They fill their days with feeding, quietly. Still, the deer remain alert. The big cats are still here, though few in number. They are known by many names: panther, puma, catamount, mountain lion, cougar. Hated by ranchers for killing cattle, the cougar actually prefers to hunt deer. Sooner or later, it must make a successful kill or face starvation. The seasons change. They roll across these canyons irrevocably. Time presses on. The formations stand like timeless castles. They are, in fact, not timeless. This awesome, gorgeous splendor is only a passing moment in Earth's history. The days spin by. They have circled over these rock formations billions upon billions of times. Ultimately, the Grand Canyon may end as it began, cut down by the very forces that created it. But in our time, this great national park offers life in astonishing fullness. It can remain a part of you for the rest of your life.
Today, Yosemite National Park is entered by millions. There are those who come here strictly for recreation, and there are those who come as though on a pilgrimage for spiritual renewal. Most visitors' reasons for coming fall somewhere in between. Yosemite spreads over 1,170 square miles of western Sierra wilderness in the state of California. It is 350 miles from Los Angeles and 193 miles from San Francisco. It encompasses 2 rivers, 429 lakes, 5 major waterfalls, and groves of trees that are the largest living things on Earth. It was millions of years in the making. But millions of years aren't that long in geological time. 25 million years ago, on the western margin of what we now call North America, a massive granite upthrust rose from the Earth's crust, a rising chunk of solid rock 400 miles long. We know it by the name Sierra Nevada, and it's rising still. This granite mass, this range, now sawtoothed and snow-covered, which is what Sierra Nevada means in Spanish, produced its very own ice ages. Glaciers moved, advancing and retreating, but always moving like gigantic chisels riving the dense rock, moving over the granite like buffers, scouring and polishing, moving like the fingers of a sculptor in carving out a paradise of nature and in sculpting what may well be the most beautiful valley in the world. The last long winter had spanned thousands of years. Now it was spring again. Should we forget that before the creeping, crushing juggernaut of glaciers, regal beasts roamed here? From the family of monstrous prehistoric bears came the prowling black bear that we know today. From the saber-toothed tiger, the mountain lion. From the fierce dire wolf, the stealthy coyote. Now that flowing water had returned, and warmth, this land was again a home for myriad forms of life. The mule deer, the raccoon, the acorn woodpecker, the yellow-bellied marmot, the tree squirrel and the ground squirrel, and the rattlers, and the red-tailed hawks that hunted them. In these last centuries, this land was settled by a Miwok people who saw the valley as Awani, a great gaping mouth. And these people became the Awanichi, the people of the gaping mouth. To the Awanichi, the valley was permeated by the Great Spirit. To them, the waterfalls cascaded with spirit life. Their hunters spoke with the spirits of the quarry that they stalked. Unreached by the 18th century Spanish missions that dotted California, the Awanichi lived from year to year to the seasonal rhythms of the valley. Then, in 1833, a party of pale-faced trappers, under the leadership of a 6-footer named Joseph Walker, traveled these forests near what is now the Tioga Road. Only 15 years later, the Sierra Nevada would see an end to innocence. Gold. Gold was discovered in the Sierra Nevada in a foothill stream north of the valley. Gold. The call sounded in St. Louis and Philadelphia and Boston. In Europe, farmers left their farms, parsons their parishes, husbands their wives and children. The tough and the lucky made it to California. Then, in 1855, a James Hutchings, a magazine publisher, led a party of sightseers to the area. In the party was Thomas Ayers, who made the first sketches of the valley. His sketches attracted more sightseers. Among them was Frederick Olmsted, who had co-designed New York's Central Park. Olmsted was deeply moved by what he saw, so much so that he promoted the idea of Yosemite as a park. 3 small sequoia groves were discovered in Yosemite, the Mariposa Grove of big trees, and the Merced and Tuolumne groves. They're the most massive growing things on Earth, bigger than anything that ever lived on Earth. One sequoia could yield as much wood as a whole acre of pine forest. So loggers descended upon the Sierras with a greed matched only by that of the gold seekers. It was more than the fledgling state of California could cope with. Logging, mining, homesteading, and flocks of pasture-killing, disease-spreading sheep. Not since the advance of the great glaciers had this area known such threats. Yosemite needed a voice.
Everyone needs beauty as well as bread. Places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to body and soul alike.
And a voice was heard. It belonged to a man who was part naturalist, part scientist, and it would seem part biblical prophet, John Muir. He was destined to become Yosemite's greatest protector. When at last Muir beheld the valley, he became, in his own words,
born again.
A tireless hiker, he explored Yosemite on foot. From the chaparral to the alpine heights. He studied everything. Every form of life caught his interest. Flowers, leaves, grasses, birds, animals. A feeling of oneness with all creation welled up in him. Muir threw his weight behind a movement to bring Yosemite into the national park system. And in 1890, a Yosemite National Park was created. In 1855, Yosemite saw about 42 tourists. Year by year, the number of visitors increased. In the early days, it was a long, bumpy trip by stage. The coming of the automobile made the park, which now covered 1,200 square miles, easier to get to and easier to get around in. Tourism flourished. Today, visitors arrive in excess of 3 million every year. They come to camp, to experience life more simply. Some come for sports, for trout fishing in crystalline mountain streams. They come to birdwatch. They come to feel a kinship with their fellow creatures on this planet. They come to rediscover the wilderness, and in so doing, discover more about themselves. Some come because of that odd melding of the tastefully primitive and the ruggedly sophisticated that's found at the old Ahwahnee Hotel. The Ahwahnee opened in 1927. This is one of the earliest buildings to weave American Indian motifs into its overall design. It's been named a National Historic Monument. Some come for rock climbing, big wall climbing here. For in Yosemite, this sport is unsurpassed. Climbers train on small cliffs where the climbs are short. When they graduate to the big ones, such as El Capitan, the biggest exposed monolith in the world, they'll be reaching slopes that are millions of years old. All who've gazed on it would agree. From those primordial humans who stumbled into this valley some 4,000 years ago, and the Ahwahnee acorn gatherers who built their villages here, and the visionaries who struggled to bring this wilderness into the national park system, to the millions who visit here. At all costs, this healing wilderness must be preserved. Yes, this healing wilderness. Yosemite is a miracle, constantly renewed, and there are those who experience moments here, moments of intense perception, even rapture. The philosopher Emerson described such moments as
the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one.
Of such moments, John Muir rhapsodized,
The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy.
To more ordinary men and women, such moments might be best expressed in the simple words of a Psalm of David. Be still and know that I am God.
The first white man to see the Yellowstone region was probably John Coulter, who left the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1807 to explore the West on his own. The mountain men found the West rich in wildlife. That is what had drawn the mountain men here. They'd come in search of beaver to supply the fur trade in Europe. Only a relatively small number of mountain men would see this Yellowstone region, however. Located in a remote corner of what is now Wyoming, it's surrounded by mountains and covered by snow for much of the year. So while the exploration and settlement of the American West was going on all around it, Yellowstone itself remained an unknown, mysterious region over 2 million acres. But the public of the early 1800s just couldn't believe these wild tales about water that would shoot 150 feet into the air. However, the rumors about Yellowstone persisted, and in 1871, Congress sent an official expedition into the region to separate fact from fiction about this place. The expedition was under the leadership of Dr. F.V. Hayden, seated at the center of the table. Dr. Hayden brought with him noted artist Thomas Moran and photographer William Jackson. Their paintings and photographs, along with Dr. Hayden's official report, and the tireless campaigning of a citizen from Montana, Dr. Nathaniel Langford, finally persuaded Congress to set this land apart as the world's first national park. A wilderness that remains today very much like it was when the mountain men first saw it. Today, even in May, there is a deep mantle of snow in the high country. But as the circling days grow longer, winter is losing its grip. On Yellowstone Lake, the ice breaks up slowly, grudgingly relinquishing its sedentary winter ways. Driven by the quickening tempo of the season, the swollen lake pushes its load into the Yellowstone River, creating a mini spectacle of its own. All across the Yellowstone region, placid streams become raging torrents. For thousands of years, the drama of birth has occurred with the first greening of the land and with the spring breakup. For young elk born in late May and early June, swollen rivers are major obstacles. Some calves follow their mothers into the raging torrent. A few are swept downstream. In a month, the calves will be sturdy enough to swim the swiftest rivers. But for now, waiting seems to be the best choice. Cow and calf are reunited again in one of the thousands of little dramas that take place in Yellowstone on a daily basis. After wintering in this semi-arid region, pronghorns now have their young. All across Yellowstone, new animal young romp into life stages as spring continues. Designed more for function than grace, the moose, with its long, lanky legs, can easily move through a wet marsh or deep snows in winter. As the largest member of the deer family, the moose is strong enough to protect itself and its young against any wild predator, even the grizzly. It is now June in Hayden Valley. This valley is the ancestral home of the grizzly. In spring, bears gather here to feed on roots and tubers. For the past 2 years, this mother has led her young to safety. But this time, sensing a change in their mother's behavior, the cubs retreat alone. The male and the female approach each other cautiously. Their solitary nature makes them hesitant, even when coming together for mating. The cubs watch from a safe distance. They have been weaned. They are on their own now. On a warm day in late spring, insects sometimes have to be measured in pounds. This may seem shocking to humans, but it is protein for the birds and a natural part of the cycle of life. The first destination for many visitors is Old Faithful, which lies surrounded by a huge visitor parking complex today. But Old Faithful is still living up to its name, and when it is about to erupt, the crowds begin to gather. It doesn't go off every hour on the hour, however. Time between eruptions may vary from 30 minutes to an hour and a half.
That's a good one right there.
It may eject a column of water as much as 130 feet into the air. In 1 square mile, there are nearly 1/5 of all the major geysers on Earth. Beehive Geyser is very near Old Faithful. It erupts with a roar that shakes the ground. More spectacular than Old Faithful, Beehive ejects a column of water 230 feet into the air. However, it only erupts about every 20 hours, so fewer people see it. Old Faithful Inn has become an important landmark now. It was built in the single winter of 1904. Designed by a young architect of that period, it was intended to blend with Yellowstone's natural surrounding. The stones for the fireplace came from only a mile away, something that wouldn't be permitted today. It is a grand hotel, 350 rooms. In order to stay here in the summer, reservations will have to be made months in advance. The sun rises again over Yellowstone. 2 young men prepare breakfast at Yancey's Hole. Hole is a mountain man term, which means valley. And here in Yancey's Valley, breakfasts have been served to outdoorsmen and trail crews for 100 years. But the breakfasts are still being served. By the time they arrive, breakfast will be ready, as expected. All sorts of good things to eat, also as expected. In the lower 48 states, the Yellowstone is the last great undammed river. As the Yellowstone River flows north, its placid character changes. It becomes rougher, more turbulent. The lower falls of the Yellowstone is twice as high as Niagara Falls. The river plunges into the spectacular Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. It is here that one can see the yellow color that gives both the river and the park their name. The wild, turbulent river has helped carve a 20-mile-long canyon over the past 200,000 years. In the northern part of the park, Mammoth Hot Spring is in a constant state of change. Underground, the springs at Mammoth percolate through layers of limestone. The hot water dissolves the limestone. When the water emerges at the surface, the limestone precipitates out and is deposited as travertine. The fastest growing spring can put down as much as 12 inches of limestone per year. A Yellowstone treasure are the bubbling mud pots. Here, nature has mixed hot gases, mud, and water to create these active features. Smoke on the Mountain in the summer of '88. In the beginning, against a blue sky, it was picturesque, rising 10,000 feet or more. The fires continued to grow. The numbers got bigger, 2,000, 4,000, 10,000 acres. The sky was no longer blue. Winds blew through the park at 80 miles per hour. Overnight, some fires doubled in size. By the end of August, the North Fork fire had burned 100,000 acres. It headed toward the town of West Yellowstone, an Old Faithful Inn. Buffalo, elk, and other large animals were seen resting and grazing within sight of the flames, sometimes only 100 yards from burning trees. Most seemed completely unconcerned about the fire. Then in September, the temperature dropped and it snowed. It was this act of nature that made the fires go out, rather than the efforts of the largest firefighting contingent in history. This mosaic shows why the fire couldn't be put out. High winds carried embers 100 yards, a half mile downwind, starting new fires. Fire transforms the scene, opens up the forest, prepares the ground for new life. Then new plants can grow, and the diversity of life increases. It becomes a healthier forest. The forest needs a fire or a windstorm to open up the canopy and let the sunlight in. 1 year after the burn, these meadows are ablaze with wildflowers. And life in the wilderness of Yellowstone continues, much as it always has. For large animals, autumn is a time of struggle, of battle. For the coyote, it is a time of transition. Some of his summer food is still available. Before denning in late autumn, the grizzly cubs have one last playful fight. Winter settles over Yellowstone with a bitterness that freezes all but the swiftest of rivers, or those heated by thermal springs. Now, the snows have become so deep that the coyotes can no longer reach the voles beneath. They must turn their attention to other, larger prey. Now the coyotes will be dependent upon buffalo and elk to sustain them through the winter months. But the coyote doesn't kill the elk. He follows the herds and waits. He waits for the bitter cold to kill the old, the sick, and the injured. Ironically, the more severe the winter, the better the coyotes will fare. Herds of elk, led by seasoned cows, migrate from the high country to the milder valleys below. Unhindered by man, these herds follow routes that have been used for thousands of years. Yellowstone Park was the beginning of a great national experiment. An experiment that is continuing today as we try to preserve a small part of the original wilderness that once covered this entire continent.